some members in Chicago, some members in Georgia, Virginia, Maryland, you know, it stays pretty local, but we do get people from around.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's really exciting. So I think we are now live, so I'm just going to start with an introduction. So hello to everyone watching at home. My name is Mallory. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Generation Activism. I'm so excited to be your host for tonight. I'm also so excited to introduce you our guest for tonight, Annie Slease, who is the Director of Advocacy and Education at NAMI, Delaware. Mental health, especially this past year, has become important to many people. Even if you yourself don't struggle with mental illness, it's almost certain based on the statistics that you do know someone who does. Tonight, we want to bring light to this conversation and contribute to destigmatizing mental health. And with that, I'll pass it over to Annie to just briefly introduce herself.
Well, sure. Thank you for having me. So I guess you should probably know that the work I'm doing right now is actually not what I trained to do. I was actually a teacher first, and I was a teacher for 25 years. So the work I'm doing now is really driven by personal experience and personal passion. So it's really exciting to be among young people again, and I'm happy to be here with you tonight.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to have you. With that, I think we'll just kind of go straight into our questions for the night. Before we start, just a heads up that we do have a bunch of people missing tonight, a lot of graduations, rescheduling and stuff. So we're having people cover their questions for them. So we have a lot of people submit questions, but we are going to be having some people ask their questions on their behalf. My question first is, can you explain why you wanted to get into the field of mental health, which is what you just kind of started off explaining?
Right. So this is a second career. In 2010, my family, my household, which consisted of me and my two teenage sons, we experienced a mental health crisis. There's really no other way to explain it. And I can tell you a little bit about what happened just to kind of give you background, but I first want to tell you that both my sons, who are in their 20s now, are 100% on board with me sharing this. They're actually really glad that what came, what we experienced turned into something positive. So basically what happened was my older son, who was 18, had just graduated high school, and he just first started showing signs of distress. But I guess, my background as a teacher didn't provide me the tools to really know what warning signs I should be looking for. And he also didn't know what was happening. So he just graduated high school and went to a great school, and nobody ever came to his school to give a presentation or any sort of like training on what mental illness is and what it isn't. More specifically, that it's nobody's fault and that it's not a sign of weakness. So we were both really unclear as to what to do. And then his younger brother was 13, and he certainly had no idea what was going on. So it was really kind of a mess for a long time. And all the while, we were going about our lives and trying to keep it quiet. And he just continued to spiral. And eventually, he ended up as an outpatient in a facility in our state, where since he was 18, he was put in treatment with other adults. And through that connection, he actually accessed a firearm because he intended to take his life. So he brought it home and hid it. And in subsequent days, weeks, I'm not exactly sure because I didn't know, he was grappling with that decision. And his younger brother found it and thought it was a toy, because guns were not a part of our household. But airsoft guns had been friends had them. So that's what my younger son thought it was. And thankfully, while it was loaded, he didn't fire it. And his older brother, said, no, that's real, put it away. And so that really started our household challenges. And it really, I have to give credit all to my younger son, my 13-year-old, who had zero training. No one, there's a group called Sandy Hook Promise that does school talks that I did actually for quite some time about saying something. And when there's something going on, you should speak up. He didn't have that training. So he was sitting with the secret for a number of weeks, just watching his older brother deteriorate. And eventually he told me what was going on. And that really started the onset of a really, really difficult time for our whole family. And it actually went on for about 2 years of silence and trying to figure things out without really telling anyone what was going on. And I'm sharing that because I think you all as young people and as activists should know that a lot of people who are experiencing distress and challenges, they might not look like they are. And I even forget what your question was, but I think you were asking me about my field. So during those years, it was really troubling. And for 2 years, we didn't tell anyone. And eventually I accessed information through this organization called NAMI Delaware. And I was actually a participant in a support group. And by then, sadly, my older son had continued to spiral and had been incarcerated. And it was really a direct result of his illness. He turned 21, 22, and 23 behind bars. And he had no criminal history. He was your average kid, never in trouble. So it was really just really tough. But I went to NAMI Delaware support group, and I was finally around people who understood how troubling and challenging it was. And I finally felt safe. So I started working as a volunteer with them. I started working with Sandy Hook Promise, as I mentioned, but I was still teaching and I was still directing musicals, and I had 90 students a year, and we did 2 musicals a year, and we were really, really busy. But I was starting to feel hope again. And my younger son was too. And my older son was. In fact, we had really developed some strong bonds during that time. And that was when I decided I think I should leave the classroom and I should reach out and do work that serves families just like mine and people just like my son, both my sons, really. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I've been doing it for 4 years now.
Yeah, and I remember back, it must have been a while ago, I think I was in 6th or 7th grade. I did a project at my middle school on mental health, and you came and spoke, and the story really stuck with me because I remember just like hearing how much it impacted your life that your son decided to tell you what was going on, and what could have happened if he didn't tell you that. And you know, it just highlights such the importance of speaking up when you see something going on and checking up on everyone, because you never know what someone is experiencing, no matter how they seem. Our next question tonight was from our member Sean, who unfortunately cannot be here tonight, but he wanted to ask what your job entails and what you kind of do on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. So our agency is not a counseling center. I should probably clarify that. So what we do as an agency is we offer support and education and advocacy in the state of Delaware for people who are affected by mental illness. So my job is really to make sure that programs and support groups and trainings are happening, and our helpline is operating. Our helpline is a number you can call, not in a crisis, but it's a line you can call to ask questions and get referrals. And if you're looking for a treatment provider, or if you're looking for information about something related to mental health, and you'd be surprised how many things really do intersect with the topic of mental illness and mental health awareness generally. So my job is sort of to kind of be sure those things are running in the state. And our agency is connected to a national organization called NAMI. And so those of you who might be tuned in today from a different state, you have a NAMI in your state too. Not every NAMI does everything exactly like NAMI Delaware, but it's kind of like a franchise in the sense that there are things that are similar. There are, like, if you think of a McDonald's, you go to a McDonald's anywhere in the world, there's going to be similarities, right? You're going to see a Big Mac, you're going to see, chicken nuggets or whatever. So NAMIs have certain programs and certain things across the board. But then we also get the autonomy to decide, based on what our staffing is like and what our community needs, we get to decide to do other things, something like tonight. So not every NAMI has a staff person who's, comfortable or interested in doing a live stream on YouTube. So it's not necessarily what every NAMI does. So my job is kind of fun that way, because I kind of get to make decisions around, as long as it's suiting our mission and connected to what we're dedicated to do. My my leadership is wonderful about flexibility there.
Thank you so much. So you work with advocacy and trying to spread awareness and education about mental health and mental illness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we do trainings too. So I'm being an educator. I was, really looking for ways to be sure I knew what it was I was talking about, right? So, you've been in classrooms, your teachers have to know what they're talking about, or you don't get a lot done, right? So I had this passion and I had this interest, and I'd done a lot of reading, but I wanted to make sure that I had the credentials to be doing what I'm doing. So I sought out training as an instructor of lots of different courses. So I can teach mental health first aid, youth mental health first aid, teen mental health first aid, which you should ask your schools to offer. All of you can go to your school leadership and ask for that. And then I also am trained in a course that's about suicide prevention called QPR. So I do those trainings, and I have a couple of staff members who also have that instructor training. And so we can train lots of people in the community that way.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you get to work on so many different aspects of mental health. And it's really interesting to learn about an institution organization that works more on providing resources and information rather than getting into the treatment, because I think people often don't realize that those are two separate things.
Yes.
I'm going to pass it to Vatsala next, who's going to cover Janie's question for tonight.
Okay.
This question, as Mel already said, is from Janie, and her question is, what is your favorite and least favorite aspect of your job?
Okay. Well, favorite, that's a hard one, because I just talked about a couple of things I really like: the flexibility of my position and the autonomy that my leadership gives me to really make decisions that are rooted in serving our community. But I think probably my favorite, if I had to pick one thing, would be all the people I get to meet. I spent 25 years in a classroom, or not the same classroom, but several classrooms. And I got to really build strong relationships with my students, but I didn't get out much. I mean, I was locked into the school building, right? So now the work I do, well, during a pandemic, I don't get out much either, but at least I'm on Zoom and I'm getting to meet big groups and wonderful groups like this. So I think that would be a favorite. As far as a least favorite, that again is a tough question. There are a lot of hard things about my job. One thing I think is especially difficult is when I mentioned the helpline and how people will call us if they're looking for help with something, if they want referrals, but also they'll call if they feel like their loved one needs something that they're not getting as far as services. And sometimes the challenges that people are facing are so complicated and complex, and they really rely on so many different systems, like say the state health system, or an insurance company, and then a hospital, and then perhaps law enforcement or criminal justice, or anything related to if someone was arrested. So all these things come into play, and it's really hard when we see things that are disappointing, and sometimes we hear about things late in the situation, and we can do as much as we can do, and then there's just sort of a wall where we just hit it, and we're like, I don't think there's more we can do until we can change the system. And that's another part of what I get to do, right? I mean, I get to meet with legislators and talk about, these are problems we keep having. We need to change, legislation, or we need to change a policy so that these problems don't continue to happen. So I think the least favorite part, I guess, would be to see people suffer to be brief about it. That's pretty hard.
Thank you so much for answering the question. And I'm going to call on the person who's supposed to take Gabby's question.
Hi, so my name is Emily, and I'm taking over Gabby's question because Gabby wishes she could be here tonight but isn't. And her question is, how has your job impacted your personal life and your perspective?
Well, that's a really good question. I think because my job is so connected to my personal life, I think it's just naturally connected. So my former job as a teacher, that impacted my personal life too. Excuse me. I think I'm talking too much. It impacted my personal life, but there was a place and a time to do schoolwork, right? You know, you're doing academics and then the day is over. And then even if you're in a musical that I'm directing, that is over and then you move on. But with the work I'm doing now, the connections are so intertwined with what I see every day. So it's very much deeply rooted in my life now. And so I guess as far as perspective, yeah, I mean, I guess my perspective has just broadened as I've done this work. So in the past 4 years, I became not only educated to train and to share, you know, information and raise awareness, but I've also become exposed to more and more disparities and barriers and challenges that families face. So while I have my own personal story that I think can be compelling in some situations, and I hope it was helpful for you all, there are so many stories. There are so many stories. And so my perspective has just sort of broadened, I think. And it's hard. I have to also say that as far as, because it's kind of a heavy load to carry as far as work, I have to really be careful not to succumb to something called compassion fatigue, which is basically like when you take care of other people or you nurture other people for a really long time, like nurses and teachers and doctors and different fields like that, they can get so worn down that they burn out. And so in the job and in teaching, it was like that too, but there was always a time to kind of rejuvenate. And in this work, there isn't the time to do that. So I have to really be careful about my boundaries and like, this is my weekend. I'm not checking my email, that kind of thing. But it's hard because, like I said, it's a passion and I'm really personally connected to it. So, you know, it's a challenge. But great question. Thank you.
And then I have a question myself, and is, do you believe schools are providing enough mental health resources for students? And if not, what do you think they could do better?
Great question. Did you know I was a teacher before you came on here to ask me that? So first of all, I have to shout out to teachers. Okay, I promise you, teachers don't get into the field of teaching for any other reason than to help kids, right? To be teachers and to work with young people. And they're doing the best they can. They always are. And the people who are leading teachers are probably former teachers. So they too, like principals and leadership that way, they're doing the best they can too. But yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely things that schools could do better now in hindsight for me, because not only did I miss signs as a parent, I missed signs as a teacher. So I think training in schools, I think it should be mandatory for student teachers. So college students who are becoming teachers, I think it should be mandatory that they take some training similar to what I shared with you earlier, youth mental health first aid, something like that, where they get a comprehensive understanding of how to recognize and respond to mental health concerns in young people. I don't think it's a teacher's job to do that, but I think it's inherently their nature to notice. So they may as well know what those signs look like. It's not their job to do anything formal in that realm because they didn't train to do that, but certainly to recognize warning signs and to help get that young person connected would be great. And then the other, and I should also say in Delaware, I know many of you are from Delaware, the public school system in Delaware, and actually the state, has recognized trauma in a very, very important way. And they're making sure that teachers get trained in trauma-informed practices. So to really understand the root, well, what trauma is and how it may affect a young person or how it may affect anyone. But that is not the same as mental illness. So I would propose that more training needs to go along with that to focus on mental illness, because because trauma and mental illness are connected, but they're not the same. And then, we have to look at our staffing. So like I said, it's not a teacher's job formally to respond to a young person who's in distress, but I think they should know how to do it simply because they see kids a lot. They could see them all day. It is the job of people like school counselors and school psychologists and other mental health professionals within the school building. They too are not clinicians in the sense like going to a therapist or going to a psychiatrist. It's not the same, but it's definitely a higher level of training that they receive to help young people. But our problem here in Delaware anyway, and I think it's probably a problem in many states, is that there aren't enough of them. So what we have is a school counselor who maybe has, 800 students or 500 students that they by themselves have to be looking out for. That's not fair. And even if it's 400 students, can you imagine being responsible for 400 students? There is a national ratio that's recommended for school counselors and a national ratio recommended for school psychologists. And those numbers are our goal as a state. We want all our schools, especially in our elementary schools, to reach those ratios so that it's reasonable for a school counselor or for a school psychologist to help young people. So there is legislation about that. And if you're in Delaware, you can look it up. It's HB 100. It's sponsored by Representative Valerie Longhurst. And it's a really important piece of legislation because what it will do is bring enough funding to elementary schools to be sure that there are enough school counselors and enough school psychologists and other mental health professionals in schools so that young people have their needs met early. And that's the key. Some data, I didn't want to rattle on a bunch of data, but I think this is important. 50% of lifetime mental illnesses. So if you take everybody who's ever going to have a mental illness, half of those people experienced their symptoms by the time they were 14 years old. So think about that. Shouldn't teachers be on board with recognizing warning signs? And so we recommend that we equip our elementary schools with the right personnel, because then we can recognize those warning signs early, intervene, and prevent those catastrophic outcomes, the ones I described in my own family. What I described that happened to my son, that's not unique. Substance use is a really common outcome. Suicide and thoughts of suicide are common outcomes. So these are, and criminal justice, interactive criminal justice are also common outcomes. So if our schools have the right people in place doing that work early, then our young people get help on time. And the last thing I will say about schools, and then I'll stop rattling on, and this of course shouts out again to teachers, but I truly think this is important. And I think you as activists can really do a big thing about this. Our school leaders need to recognize the educators and nurture them. And when I say that, I don't mean that they shouldn't look at the students. Obviously, that's the primary concern, right? We get into this field because we want to help students, but you can only pour from a cup when it's full, and when it's empty, you're out, right? And our teachers' cups are pretty empty. And our schools keep asking more and more of our teachers, especially now during this pandemic. But even before that, when I was still in the field, I left in 2017. And nationally, in 2018, more teachers left the field of teaching than any year in recorded history up until that point. Now, I would bet, I haven't checked lately, but I would bet more are leaving now because of the pandemic, because it's a stressful job. So what I think you all can do as activists is to recognize the hard work that educators do and find ways to bring them that opportunity for nurturing themselves and really raise awareness to your school leadership that, do our teachers get enough time off? Do our teachers have time to themselves to run to the doctor's office, to run to the bathroom, for goodness sake. I mean, these are things that you all as leaders in our youth community could be doing to recognize just how hard our teachers are working and how much we need them. We need them healthy. So that's another piece to the mental health puzzle, not quite direct to serving students, but I think it's important to mention.
Thank you for your response. I'm actually going to send it over to Bella for the next question.
Hi, my name is Bella, and my question is, what are some words, phrases, jokes that people should avoid because they're insensitive to those who struggle with mental illness?
Oh, Bella, I am so glad you asked that. So language is so powerful. And I'm not just saying that because I used to teach English, although I'm probably saying that because I used to teach English. But it can be so effective when we use good language to raise awareness and to be activists and advocates. But it also can be so stigmatizing. And it actually can be stigmatizing by accident. So there are a lot of things you all can do that are pretty easy. The first one I would say is to be sure that you distinguish the difference between the words mental health and mental illness or mental health disorder. Mental health isn't a thing that's bad. It's actually, it's a good thing because you have it. And so you're alive because you have it. So that's a good thing. It's just like physical health. You just have it, right? When it gets, compromised in some way, it can become a mental illness. And I think one of the things young people and lots of just people do is they sort of use the terms of disorders as adjectives. Like somebody might describe the weather in the spring, like even most recently, they might, the weather is so bipolar. It was just raining and now it's hot and it was cold yesterday. Like, okay, I'm sorry. Bipolar disorder is a mental health condition that is significantly difficult and it affects people in really, really challenging ways. It is not anything like that doesn't have anything to do with the weather. Don't use that word to describe the weather. And also don't throw around a mental health disorder word to describe yourself if you're just having a bad day, right? So I've certainly heard people say, I am so OCD. I have to have my fork, my knife and my plate just like this. And okay, no, you might be particular, you might be precise, you might be lots of things, but you don't have OCD unless a doctor told you do. And it's also really complicated, has nothing to do with forks and knives. So, we have to get away from using health disorders to describe things. So think about it this way. How many times have you ever heard anybody go, oh, that is so breast cancer? Or, oh my gosh, what a diabetic. Like you don't hear that, right? So why is it we're doing that with health conditions of the brain? Probably because we don't understand them, I would say. So with regard to language, we don't want to talk about disorders unless we're actually talking about being diagnosed with them or living with them. And if we do want to disclose something like that, we want to do it person first. So you want to say, for example, I don't say I have a bipolar son. I have a son. I have two sons, and they're a lot of things. But the one who lives with bipolar disorder is not his disorder. So if I say he's my bipolar son, that makes it sound like that's all he is. So we don't want to do that. And we also don't want to say that somebody suffers with unless they say they suffer with. So I can say, I have a son, he's 29 years old, he lives with bipolar disorder, but he can say, I suffer with bipolar. He can, that's his call, not mine, right? And then we never, ever, ever should joke about suicide. I literally was just walking on Main Street the other night with two people were just walking behind me coming out of Starbucks or something. And I genuinely heard them between the two of them going, oh, I cannot, blah, blah, blah. And she was just complaining about something. She's just, I'm going to kill myself. And the other one just, and I had to resist myself from just turning around going, do you have any idea what saying that means? Do you have any idea how that is not funny? So I would absolutely explore that with your friends, with your peers. Make sure you call them out, but not in a rude way. Do it in a way that reminds them that it's not funny, right? And if someone says something around suicide and you're not sure if they're joking, don't assume they're joking. I would assume they're not joking, right? It's not a funny topic, and I would definitely make sure that you and your friends don't use that in jest. And then finally, this is a challenge for you. And I offer this challenge, but I recognize that it is a difficult one. So please don't just dismiss it going, I'm never going to do that. Just give it a try. Okay. So here's the challenge. I want you first to pay attention to any time you hear people say the word crazy. Just listen. Don't do anything about it. Just pay attention. Take note. Make a little note to yourself about, oh, that's 3 times today or whatever. Listen on the news. Listen on the radio. Listen in radio, music, right? Listen to your friends, to your family, even to your educators, to leadership. People use that word, and it is a very stigmatizing word. And here's the other thing, coming from the English teacher, it is a crutch word. Do you know what a crutch word is? A crutch word is a word we use because we're too lazy to figure out the word we really mean. Or it's a crutch word can also mean we use it to fill the gaps of silence before we're thinking of what we want to say. Like can be a crutch too, or so. But a crutch word in this case, crazy, is used because people don't really want to think about what they really mean. That is so crazy. No, it's really not. It's unusual, or it's baffling, or it's funny, or whatever. Pick the word you mean. And if you can go without using that word, not only will you be destigmatizing and helping people who might be offended by that word, you'll also be bettering your vocabulary and really sounding a lot more precise with your language, which can't be a bad thing, right? I knew I was going to wear my English teacher hat on this call. So there it is. Okay. And, along with the word crazy, there are words like insane and psycho and all that. I would suspect you would notice that if people were calling other people that, but people use those words when that's not really what they mean. And I think it would really be helpful to eliminate those words.
Thank you for the response. Yeah, that taught me a lot.
Good, good.
I'm going to pass the next question to Linda.
What type of legislation could be passed to help people who struggle with mental illness?
Oh, that's great. So I mentioned one already, the HB 100 about the mental health supports in elementary school, and we're hoping that will pass. It's been being discussed for about 3 years now. One that did just, I think it did just pass, is around telehealth, which if you're familiar with, if you've had to see a doctor at all during the pandemic and you were able to do it either by phone or by Skype or Zoom, that's what telehealth is. And originally, when the pandemic happened, there were some rules that were put into place specifically for telehealth. I mean, specifically for the pandemic, excuse me. And they were set to expire when the pandemic ended. And what we found is that people who may not have either the transportation or the time off of work, or just the flexibility in their schedules to go to a mental health professional for treatment, they can hop on a telehealth call pretty quickly. And what we're finding is the access has improved for people who need help. And so that is a really important piece of legislation that has been passed in Delaware. Federally, we need to make sure that it's happening across the board in all states, and that no insurance providers eliminate that as an option after the pandemic, because we do see that will be helpful. Because, only around half of the people who experience mental illness actually get treatment for it. So it's somewhere in the 50% mark. It varies slightly year to year, but it's a really unfortunate number. Another piece of legislation that's important is around, well, here's another activist moment here for you. By July of next year, so in 13 months, there will be a new phone number that people can call across the country, specifically for mental health and substance use crises. And that number will be 988. So we'll be looking for voices like yours to make sure people know this. Now, what goes with that is that who's going to answer the phone when people call 988, right? It's not magic. We have to have people ready to respond. So legislation is and conversations around legislation are being had all over the country. And in Delaware, NAMI Delaware is a part of that conversation to make sure that the system that would respond to that phone call is adequately funded and really well planned. So that if I go back 11 years and I knew that I could call 988 in my son's case, if I called, someone would get to my home at a reasonable time and there wouldn't be any hiccups along the way. There wouldn't be, oh, I'm sorry, you have to call this number. Oh, I'm sorry, this person has to, yeah, no, I need someone now. So that's another really important one, 988. And then one more that's coming up. I know you all talked to Senator Sarah McBride recently, right? So she is sponsoring a really important bill called the Healthy Delaware Families Act. And what that is basically it's for paid family leave for many reasons. And one of them would be in the case where either someone was experiencing mental illness and needed to take a break from their work, or someone's helping a loved one in that circumstance. So for example, back into my family situation, if my son needed me at home and I wanted to stay home, but I didn't have any sick time left at my teaching job, this act would go into place so that I could still pay my bills, but stay home with my son and help him. And this is a NAMI figure data point. On average, family members who are supporting a loved one who has serious and persistent mental illness. So I'm talking about conditions like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder. These are really, really rare but very serious illnesses. Caregivers, on average, spend 32 hours a week with their loved one, and they don't get any time paid for that. So if they could actually be sustained financially while they're caring for their loved ones, and they wouldn't be fearing that they were going to lose their job, that would be really important. So I'm really looking forward to Senator McBride's bill on that.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Lizzie.
Okay.
So my question is, how do you think that the criminal justice system should address mental health?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I shared with you my own family's experience with that. And, it's not uncommon for people who have mental illness to interact with the criminal justice system. I believe the numbers are people with serious and persistent mental illness are 7 times more likely to interact with law enforcement than average citizens. And when you look at the populations in prisons, so federal and state prisons, 37% of inmates experience or have diagnosed mental health conditions. So 37%. If you look at youth in the juvenile justice system, that's 70% have a mental illness. So we absolutely need to be sure that the criminal justice system at every level has the supports in place. So starting at incarceration and working backwards, our prisons and our juvenile justice systems need to be sure they have effective care. The care needs to be adequate, it needs to be accessible, and it needs to be quality. Inmates deserve the same healthcare rights as anyone else. And they're certainly not going to be rehabilitating rejoin society if their health is not met. So we have to be sure of that. And then working backwards, when you think about the interactions I said, we need to be sure our law enforcement is adequately staffed and prepared to interact with individuals who have mental illness and or are in mental health crises. And one thing NAMI Delaware does to help with that is we coordinate a training called Crisis Intervention Team. And law enforcement officers can apply to be trained for this and become a CIT officer. It's 40 hours of training. They have to be accepted into the class, or it's kind of like a school for a week. And they learn how to de-escalate a mental health crisis. And they also learn about resources and alternatives for going directly into, arresting someone. So we have to look at that diversion. We have to look at alternatives. There's something called mental health court. Unfortunately, my son did not qualify to be a part of that. And to this day, I'm still a little befuddled by that. And someday I'll figure out that that problem. But the concept of mental health court is that someone who experiences significant mental illness should have different response from the court system than an average citizen, because their needs are different. And they might, really benefit from other health supports that they might not have had up until that point. So those are the kinds of things I think need to be considered. And I think the criminal justice system needs education on mental health awareness, just as a whole. I can tell you, I shared with you that my son was incarcerated, and his offense was not violent, but it was certainly serious. And it was connected to a manic episode. His illness is bipolar disorder. And when he did go before the judge to be sentenced, the judge verbatim said, "And about that mental illness, you're going to have to take care of that yourself." And that's how it went. That was in 2014. I think things have gotten better. And I continue to work so that things get better, but we need to inform people. People need to understand that this is a health condition and not a choice.
Thank you. I'm passing the next question to Megan.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Megan, and my question is, how can we educate other people about mental illness without scaring them away?
Okay. So tell me why you say scaring them away, Megan.
I feel like a lot of times, especially like in high school or in any type of situation, when we talk mental illness, people tend to be like, I don't know, scared away. Like they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, that's true. And it's probably because it's like really misunderstood. I mean, think about it. It's an invisible illness, right? If you break your arm, you can see what hurt, right? Even if you have a stomach ache, you can point to what hurts. But if somebody has a mental illness, it's really hard to put a finger on really what's going on. I think having conversations should start with very general, easy, talks, and it should be personal on some level. I'm not telling you to disclose anything you don't want to disclose, but I think when people open up and say, look, okay, so here's a question. Have you ever asked somebody, how are you? And they've said something other than I'm fine or I'm good? Not often, right? You usually go, hey, how are you? And they go, oh, fine. And then you move on, right? That's just like a thing you do, but you move on to talk about whatever you were going to talk about. But what if when somebody said, how are you? You go, well, I'm okay. You really want to know? And if they say, they're caught off guard, then you say, well, you asked and I'd love to tell you. So those are the kinds of conversations I think we need to start having. And I don't want you all to carry that burden yourselves, but I think as a community and certainly as a generation, you all are doing that more already. and it's changing everything, and it's awesome. So keep doing that. Certainly don't disclose things you don't want to disclose, and don't burden someone to the point where they don't know how to respond to your needs. But being honest with your friends and saying, I'm having a really hard time today. I just keep worrying about this thing, or I'm having a really hard time today, and I can't stop thinking about being honest with each other, and not trying to say, well, I think you have a diagnosis of, but no, we're not going to try to diagnose each other. But I think honesty is probably one of the best ways to have conversations around anything, really, and to really learn. And then the other thing I think is part of your question. You say, how can we educate people? Well, I think we can educate them with programs that are designed just for that. Now, have you ever heard of an evidence-based program? You can take it apart and figure out what it means. An evidence-based program is something that has been proven with evidence that it works, right? So think about all that we know about vaccines. That's evidence because of science, right? So programs that have been done and studied to prove that they work, those are evidence-based programs. Well, if you and your school and your colleagues and your friends and your family, if you access training that was evidence-based and you actually learned the realities around mental health, and then you shared that, obviously not to be annoying to your friends, but just when it comes up, well, actually, no, did you know that blah, blah, blah? You're going to break down that stigma. You're just going to do it naturally. And I think that's probably the best way to do it. I wouldn't recommend doing anything that's going to scare away your friends. But I get how it could, if you're talking about something that they're uncomfortable about. But why not just say, hey, I know this is probably an icky thing, it feels uncomfortable, but do you want to know some of the stuff I learned? Why not, right? But I can totally see how it could be, a tricky thing. So that's why I think getting training, teen mental health first aid, ask your schools about it. You can reach out to me. I can give you information about it. It's a really cool program. I've taught it. And you would have the tools that you would need to not only help yourself, help your friends, but also just to talk about it and know what you're talking about. So that would be my recommendation there.
Thank you so much. Before I pass it on, I do have one more follow-up question.
Okay.
So I'm the type of person that is in that situation where, they tell me, I'm having a bad day and here's why. I get kind of awkward and I don't know what to say. I'm very Chandler Bing, where he's very sarcastic and he can't give a piece of advice.
Sure.
So how can I kind of improve myself with offering advice?
Oh, I love that, Megan. Okay, so one of the great things about responding to someone who's sharing those kinds of things is you don't have to do anything. In fact, the less you do, the better. What you can concentrate on is not telling them what to do, because frankly, even if you felt exactly what you think of they're describing, you haven't, because you're not them. So rather than focusing on how you can give them advice or what you can say back, focus on what they're saying and just sort of have you ever heard of reflective listening? It's kind of like what it sounds like. So think of reflective anything, you see it back, right? So if somebody shares with you, I'm having a really hard day, I just ran into my ex and blah, blah, blah. So you say, oh, wow, you're having a hard day. You just really say it back. That's all you have to do. You don't have to solve anything. The great thing about being a responsive friend around mental health challenges isn't what you know. It isn't what you do. It's just being there. It's just listening and telling them, hey, I don't know how to solve this. And I'm guessing you don't want me to solve it anyway, but I can listen. Or you can also ask them, what can I do? How can I help? Right? You don't have, and that's a really important, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I think it's a really misunderstood thing about this topic in general. And I don't think it's just young people who ask this and wonder it. Adults do too. They just want to go, well, I don't want them to talk about that. I don't know what I'd say. Ugh. Well, just listen. That's all you got to do. If I'm going to tell you something and open my heart to you, I don't need you to tell me what to do next. I kind of just need you to listen to it, and I'll feel better after I say it. Now, that being said, I've got to throw this out there too. If anything they say worries you, then you really should turn to a trusted adult. It's not, no matter what kind of best friend they are, no matter how much you have trust in them and they have trust in you, to be a good friend is to find someone who has the wisdom and the resources that you might not at your age. That doesn't mean you're not a good friend. It means you are. Go back to what my 13-year-old did. He was trying to be a good brother by keeping a secret, and then he realized that was not the good brother thing to do. The good brother thing to do was to tell me, because he didn't know what to do. So you, as a friend, all of you, can listen. You can ask your friend, how can I help? You can tell them, I'm here for you. But you also need to remember that your youth, it's not bad, but it doesn't give you the wisdom and the access to resources that adults have. So turn to an adult, and you can tell them that. You can say, listen, I'm really worried about you, and I know you're telling me not to tell anybody, but I need you to know that you're giving me some stuff I'm not sure what to do with. And I want to take you and talk to so-and-so with you. You can go to the school counselor, you can go to your parent, you can go to whomever. And even if they go, no, don't tell. And even if they act mad at you, you need to follow your gut and know that you need to go to a trusted adult, because they're your friend and you care about them, even past them being mad or nervous about it. Okay. That's part of that say something piece. They could be mad at you, let them be mad at you, but they'll be here to be mad at you. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, right? Let them be here to be mad at you. They'll get over the mad. Keep them safe, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, just remember,
Thank you so much
you don't
for
give
answering my
advice.
questions.
You're never expected to give advice. In fact, we tell adults not to give advice too. It's part of a key step in the mental health first aid class. Just give reassurance, give information, but don't give advice. It doesn't help.
Thank you. I feel more confident when I'm in that
Oh,
situation.
good. I'm glad.
Thank you. I am now going to pass it over to whoever is taking Kate's question.
I actually think Kate's question was already covered in another answer, and we only have 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we have time to get to Chelsea and Miranda's questions, so I'm just going to pass it right to Chelsea.
How do you see mental health and activism related?
Oh, okay. Well, activism, is raising awareness and talking about issues that matter. And, mental health is an issue that matters to a lot of people, but it's also really misunderstood. So activism is an opportunity to make sure people understand things about mental health that they might not even know they don't know, right? So it's kind of your opportunity to have conversations like we're talking about, and even just, that the challenge I gave you earlier about avoiding the word crazy. Like, don't point out to other people, oh, you shouldn't say that. Like, just, you don't say it, right? And doing that can really move mountains. It's really like a really slow ripple, and it can really change the way people see things. And that's what activism is. You're trying to raise awareness and make change. And in doing that, mental health awareness is a really important, difficult topic to do that for. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it to whoever is taking Margaret's question.
Hi, I'm Miranda. We're going to skip Margaret's question, but I guess the final question for the night is,
Okay.
Why do you think mental health is so stigmatized, and how can we as activists prevent that?
I think mental health in general, and then mental illness specifically, has a huge stigma around it because of ignorance. And I'm using that word in its truest definition. Ignorance just means not knowing. Sometimes people use the word ignorant in an offensive way, like, oh, you're being ignorant, and they're trying to insult them. But I don't mean it that way. I mean it like the true definition, not knowing. So stigma is often connected to misunderstanding and myth, right? So you as activists can make change just by becoming aware, getting educated, right? And then making gentle shifts, things like the language that we talked about, raising awareness at your school about things you'd like to learn more about, and presentations you'd like to have. And in doing that, you're going to be destigmatizing. One other thing that kind of connects to stigma that you could do, if you've ever heard, and this is a heavy topic, and I hate to close it with this, but it's something I meant to say with language. The topic of suicide is a really hard topic to talk about, but it's important to talk about within the context of mental health awareness. And also, today I'm wearing my orange. I don't know if you all are into that, but gun violence prevention is a really important part. And people die by suicide. People who die by gun more often die from suicide than they do from homicide. So when talking about suicide, avoid using the word commit, because when you commit, your impulse with that word is commit a crime, commit a sin. When people die by suicide, they die at the end of an illness, as a result of an illness. So when we can destigmatize in that way, that you are being an activist, you are raising awareness when you just change your language. And those are some key things I think could really be helpful. And again, I'm sorry to end on that downer of a topic, but it's an important one. I think you all, you certainly should be aware of that issue, but also know that it's very preventable. Suicide is preventable.
Thank you so much. I didn't know the thing about the committing, so that's like really good to know. Thank you.
Great. I'm glad that was helpful.
All right, so I'm going to wrap it all up for tonight. I personally, I live with mental illness. I live with OCD, and it's been really interesting to hear the way that you talk about language, because I think it's so much more important than people realize, especially with the thing you use as using mental illnesses as an adjective. People don't realize how harmful and how invalidating it is to someone who actually does live with that. But when, I'm walking around with someone and they say, oh, that picture isn't straight on the wall, I'm so OCD about that. It's more invalidating than you would think, because when I think OCD, I think all of the experience that I've lived with over the years, and all of the things I've had to fight for, and all of the things that I've gone through. And when they say OCD, they see a picture on a wall or something not being straight on a table. And I think just educating people about changing their language and using words for what they are, instead of using them to describe something else when it's really not meant to be used that way, is really, really important. And I think the language die by suicide is really, really important too, because I've always thought that, committing something is a negative connotation, and you don't want that with suicide, because it's tragedy. It's not a sin. It's not something that they want to do. It's a tragic event that happens because of an illness. And I think that, the way that you described all this has been so helpful for me. I learned a lot, and I know definitely everyone else did too. So I want to thank you for talking with us tonight and speaking with us and sharing everything that you shared, especially for getting so vulnerable about your personal experience, because that's always so helpful and so important. And every time someone does that, it saves someone else's life. So it's really important to do that. And so thank you so much for sharing that with us. To everyone watching at home, thank you so much for watching. We really hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. If you want to check it out or share with a friend, this will be up on our YouTube page afterwards. And you can find us on social media at TikTok and Instagram at generation.activism and Twitter at GENACT2. And we will be back with another meeting soon, and we will let you know on our social media as soon as possible. So thank you so much for speaking with us, Annie.